Today we're talking to Daniel Elliot, who is an occupational therapist, an aging in place specialist, a home modification advocate, and the director of business development at Jukebox Health. We are talking today about occupational therapy, home modifications, and how to keep older adults safe and independent.
I'm an occupational therapist, actually. So I started off in private practice, home care, just going to patients' homes, where they were living, where they were doing most of their activities, and doing therapy there. So it's considered outpatient. Um, Basically realized that I could work with somebody for 15, 20 sessions. And then they'd contact me 3 months later and say, hey, like, I'm not doing my home exercises anymore. I'm not doing my activities. Like, let's do therapy again. And unfortunately, as much as I'd like to, like, you can't really do therapy for an entire year with somebody because of insurance and all of that. So I wanted to think of a way to kind of have a more lasting, impression on the care plans that I was doing with people. And one way I thought that could be done was by addressing the environment. So you can get somebody as far as you can physically and functionally, to a certain point. And then you really want to start to look at the environment and creating an environment that works for that person and where they're currently at. So just dove right into the home safety and home modification space. Started doing private consulting for families that wanted to like remodel a bathroom or like make a couple changes or install some grab bars. And then met the founders at Jukebox Health who basically said, hey, Dan, we love what you're doing on a small scale, like just on Long Island and in my community, but we are scaling this thing naturally because we really believe that housing and home safety is an issue, especially for our older adults. So I joined as the fifth team member at the time a couple years ago. And now I lead clinical partnerships. So I have this unique opportunity as a clinician to also speak with other healthcare organizations that want to implement home safety and home modifications into their care plan. So like whether that's a hospital or a therapy company or a home care agency or really anybody who's, working with older adults. So that's kind of my journey and what I do at Jukebox Health. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And what a cool transition for you from like you're a local business, which I don't know if you're still running that, but to be able to scale this with Jukebox. I'm wondering if you can explain, like, can you tell us what an occupational therapist does?
yeah.
What is occupational therapy and how is it different from physical therapy?
Yeah, us OTs, we get that a lot. A lot of people ask, even like other healthcare clinicians sometimes ask. I think the best way to explain it is actually like how we collaborate with physical therapists. So OTs, what we're focused on is function and what's called activities of daily living. So at its core, like dressing, feeding, bathing, all the stuff you need to be able to do as independently as possible to like start your day and like do things that you want to do. So the OT is going to work on those skills. If you've had a fall and you went to the hospital and you become very weak, and you can't dress yourself or you can't get to the bathroom safely, the OT is going to work on those skills with you, in the context of your environment. Whereas PT, what they're going to do, that person has a fall and is really weak. They're going to do exercises, walking, endurance training. So they really work well together because the hope is PT gets you really strong and gets you having more endurance. And then OT is going to get you using that endurance and strength to get back to doing the activities that you want to do. I think one of the issues with occupational therapy is people now link occupation with job. There is a occupational therapy where you look at somebody's ergonomics when they're sitting at work, et cetera. But when OT was sort of formed as a profession in 1917, at that time, at that period of time, an occupation only meant something that you do during your day. So occupational therapy was born out of this therapy to help people to be able to do the things that they want to do during their day. So that's a really long explanation. I never go into that detail with people when they ask, but it's an interesting story, for sure.
I think that's interesting. I cheated and I do know what occupational therapy is, but I do also associate the word occupational with my job. And I think about it in the ways of like workplace hazards. So I think that's
Yeah.
useful. I guess I'm wondering, what are some of the reasons, like what are some of the most common things that lead someone to you? I understand your role with Jukebox is different, but as an OT, what are some of the common things that lead someone to you?
Yeah. I think most, some of the most common ones are, well, I'll break it up. There's preventative and then there's more reactive cases that we'll work with. So a reactive case might be, I'll go back to the same example. Somebody had a fall, they go to the hospital and they're getting discharged in, a week or 2 weeks. And they realize my home is not set up safely, or I fell because this rug was in the way and the bathroom was too slippery. And now I'm going back to the same environment. And they're really concerned about falling again and going back to the hospital. So that reactive situation is when they reach out to us and say, hey, I want to make a change so that this doesn't happen again. And then on the other side are more preventative cases where maybe somebody went to the doctor and they just gotten diagnosed with Parkinson's. They don't have a lot of symptoms. They're not falling, but they just want to plan for the future. Or maybe it's just somebody who's recently retired and thinking about redoing some things in their home anyway and want to plan for the future as well. We don't get as many of those as we'd like to. I just don't think people are at the point where they're like so preventative. But yeah, those are probably the two biggest cases where someone will reach out to us.
Awesome. Yeah, that's helpful. And you've touched on a couple of them already, but I'm hoping you can tell us, like, what causes older adults to fall? Like, what are some
Mhm.
risk factors for falling?
Yeah. So everybody's different, of course, which is why it's important to have a clinician kind of investigate that. I think it can be intrinsic, which is, maybe you have a condition that's impacting your balance. Maybe it's impacting your vision. So you can't see as well and you're tripping over things. And it could also be extrinsic. So you could be living in an environment that's not conducive to like your current status, right? Or it's just unsafe. You have, a throw rug that's really slippery on the floor, or you have a really high tub to step into, or there's clutter in the bedroom. Those are all like extrinsic or environmental factors that can lead to a fall. And there's, not to scare your listeners, but there's probably 800 other things that you could think of in the environment that could potentially be dangerous. And then also it's seasonal as well, right? I think, if you think in the winter, especially on the East Coast, as it gets icy, snowy, cold, or whatever, your outdoor area is really important as well. But unfortunately could cause a fall too. Yeah, those are the major ones. And then again, every person's different. If they have Parkinson's or arthritis or had a stroke, like you're always looking at what specifically is going on with that person, and how that could potentially lead to a fall and how to avoid it. So
After someone falls, like why are falls such a serious hazard for older adults?
unfortunately, they often lead to a lot of decline in function. So one aspect is somebody has a fall, they go to the hospital, maybe they have a stay or unfortunately, but what can happen too is they fracture their hip, go through surgery and all of that. Um, there's a lot of research out there that just shows that they're at a higher risk for falling again. They're at a high risk for declining in function as well. So that one fall that could happen out of the blue and for, just a minor thing in the home, causing you to trip can lead to, years of decline that you otherwise might not have had. And then even if, you have like if you have great therapy and address everything, but you've had that fall, like there's a likelihood that you're going to have a fear of falling, moving forward as well, which also impacts your life. So the idea is to prevent the fall so that it doesn't have these, effects on your life moving forward.
You just read my mind, maybe. But this fear of falling, I read a stat somewhere, and I don't know if it's true or not, but
Mhm.
that older adults fear falling more than they do robbery or financial stress or other health problems. Um, Regardless of that stat's true or not, I guess the question is like, how can older adults and or us as caregivers help reduce this
Mhm.
risk? Sorry, this fear of falling.
Yeah, I mean that sounds about right. Um, yeah, I think for older adults in their mind, they already know like what a fall could lead to. I think I think back like 10 years ago, I used to see like the help I can't get up stuff, which I absolutely hate. Not a big fan of that, but I think it's sort of pushed these thoughts into older adults' minds that a fall can lead to a lot of bad things. And the reality is it can. I think I'll mention another study they did at a Helsinki university. They found that older adults fear going to a nursing home more than they fear death. And I think it's that imagery of having a fall, being in the hospital, your family being upset, then going to a nursing home, being in a wheelchair, just like watching TV for the rest of your life, right? Like that image is so scary for older adults and really anybody, right? But ways to reduce fear of falling as a family, I think family support is huge and caregiver support is huge as well. If we're talking research, there's even research out there that shows caregiver support has such better outcomes for people. That's a huge one. And when they're taking action and taking steps to get the right people in place to help address that fear of falling, that's something that's really powerful. And then those, the experts, the clinicians, the doctors, all doing their part to put somebody's ease at mind and address each thing that might be causing them to have that fear of falling. So for us, for example, if somebody, we've had people who are petrified to go back into the bathroom because that's where they had their fall. And by changing the environment and then walking them through their new space, you can get somebody to have less of a fear of falling.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for sharing that study. You guys at Jukebox do, fall risk assessment.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a bit more about like risk assessment tools? Are there different options? Is there a best one?
The one we point to a lot is called Steady, and that's an initiative developed by the CDC. It's essentially a tool that allows you. It provides a home safety checklist or a screen. It provides a fall risk assessment as well, and then it gives you different resources and essentially options to choose from to help address those things. So anybody can do those screens, and then you go down the line and it says, hey, you should talk to a geriatric care manager or you should talk to a physical therapist and get this assessment. So it's a really great way for a caregiver or the client themselves to kind of self-assess or self-screen and then make decisions. One of those things that's a decision-making tool. So after you take the first couple screens, is addressing home safety. And like, that's where we certainly advocate for us to be involved. And then in terms of when we do that full home assessment, not just the screen, we've taken different evidence-based protocols, assessments, and kind of combined all of that to make sure that we're addressing every possible hazard in the home.
And how often would you say it's helpful to be doing a screening and or a full assessment?
How often for like one person in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm specifically thinking about older adults whose health might be changing, more quickly. How frequently should they or their caregiver be doing an assessment?
I would say probably at least twice a year. And also acting on it too, right? So that first screen, if you find that there's something, potentially wrong, like diving into that, getting an assessment done by a clinician, they'll probably address most of the things. And then 6 months later, and a year later, if you notice anything changing, that screen is a great way to recognize that. So
I'm wondering, what's the role that someone like you, an occupational therapist, plays in the home modifications process? Like, I don't know a lot about the in between. You get an assessment done, you should make these changes. But where does someone like you come in to support in that process?
Yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest challenges is kind of combining the clinical side of it to the home services side or the actual installation of it. It's not very often that healthcare workers are talking to contractors. So it's a really unique, connection that has to be made. The OT's role is to essentially go into the home, develop rapport with the family, talk to them about their goals, where they want to live, how they want to live, medical history, all of those things, and then go room by room, keeping all of those things in mind and using clinical decision making to say, okay, what are the hazards in the home and what home modification, equipment or products am I going to recommend to help address this? So they're keeping all of those things in mind. They're creating a report, and then that report is what should be shared with the contractor or installer. So there are lots of, there's a lot of home modification consultants, including us. Something that we do is that report also includes recommendations for installation. So for example, if we're recommending a grab bar be placed next to a toilet or in a shower, we're going to recommend the size of that grab bar, the color, if they have any like vision impairments, and also the placement as well. So that once the installer is ready to install, he knows kind of exactly where it's going to go and why it can do his or her thing in installing it properly and securely. So I think that's where the OT plays the role of the clinical decision making and what needs to be changed. And then the installer is the one who is taking that information and actually executing on it.
Yeah, I mean, what an interesting like crossover of
Yeah.
clinician talking to a contractor. Such different worlds. But so home, modifications or remodels. I imagine installing a grab bar is not extremely expensive, but I imagine
Mhm.
installing a ramp or the cost I imagine varies here.
Yeah.
Um, could be expensive. Or I don't know if you're able to, but can you share sort of a range of what someone might be expecting to spend on a remodel or modification? And
Yeah.
any tips for reducing cost?
That's a common, you know, people commonly think that, the word home modification, it sounds like we're doing a ton of work and totally remodeling, but that's not the case. We also say sometimes like home safety adaptations, it sounds a little less intensive. Um, I mean, the average project price that we're seeing is between like $850 and $1,200, which actually happens to be less than the out-of-pocket cost for a fall, for like co-insurance and stuff like that in some instances. So, it's for some people that's a lot. For some people they can handle it. We'll work with everybody to make sure that the job gets done. But I would say that's sort of the average. And that project between $850 and $1,200 might be like a few grab bars, replacing a toilet, putting in motion censored lighting, a bed rail, and maybe replacing like a door threshold. So like that threshold between a hallway and a bathroom, that's a tripping hazard. So all of that can add up. And I think it's important to note too, the reason most of our projects are in that range is because OTs are making really targeted recommendations. Like they're not just going in and saying, let's just redo all of this, right? They're going in and saying, here's exactly the things that are causing you an issue and exactly how to address it. So that also in and of itself can drive costs down.
I'm going to loop us back really quick, but
Sure.
like you've talked a little bit about preventing this, doing it in advance, instead of, experiencing the cost of a fall and then also needing to make home modifications. Like now
Right.
this is, doubled up. I'm not entirely sure what my question is, but like how far in advance or when might someone start addressing how to modify their home? So to avoid a fall, I don't know if this is an age or symptoms that someone might see in someone, but how to, I don't think it's like our way in America to be preventative. So,
Yeah.
Any tips from an OT on how to do that in this case?
Yeah. So you're asking like if there was like a benchmark or like a place that maybe could apply to everybody.
Yeah, which,
Um,
maybe is a ridiculous question because each of our
no,
situations is so nuanced, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, that for starters, yes, absolutely. They've done research on like the entire or a very large population, and anybody over 70 is at an increased risk for fall. So I think at that age, and in America today, that's starting to become retirement age, for a lot of people. So I think around that, like 70, 75 is when you should definitely be thinking about that. But let's say you're, in your late 50s and 60s, and you're moving or something like, yeah, you're moving, or unfortunately you've been like diagnosed with some condition, like that's a good time to start thinking about the home environment. So that's my best effort to kind of
That's
thought
helpful.
on it.
I think the age marker is good, or a diagnosis, but yeah, I think it's not it's not in our way, I don't think, to be preventative. Um, this question, I don't know if you know or not, but back to
Okay.
cost of modification, and you maybe do, modifications and remodels, but are there any like programs or reimbursement, like any way that people can save money out there beyond just like out of pocket cost?
I'll do my best. And some of these things require like an additional expert. And I'll give you an example. So there's certain deductions or write-offs that you can make every year for like medical related expenses and home repairs related to that. So that's a situation where you could talk with your accountant on that. There's a fantastic organization called Rebuilding Together. They're national. They have different national chapters, and they're all retired contractors and handymen, and they'll actually do the labor piece of a modification project for free or install a ramp for free. You do have to you have to meet certain financial criteria, um, but it doesn't include like your home and like a couple assets like that. It's like based on your income at the time. And then in terms of the insurance landscape, some long-term care plans include a home modification benefit. That's simply talking with your long-term care um, representative, and they can walk you through that process. And then there's some really good funding state by state through Medicaid as well. So if somebody is on Medicaid, they can go through different programs that the state offers and actually get projects completely funded. That's something that we're starting in New York and New Jersey to work with state Medicaid programs that cover quite a bit, actually, like over $15,000 for home modifications. So that's like the insurance that's like the coverage and funding landscape. Oh, I guess the last thing too, there's different, condition specific societies. So the MS Society, the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, those are always great organizations to be a part of if it's applicable to you, because they'll always have really great resources for funding and grants.
That's awesome. And I didn't give you enough credit. You had a lot of resources available, and we'll be sure to like tag them all.
Well, people ask
Yeah,
all the time, of course, you know.
yeah. I think
So we always try and help them.
yeah. I mean, it's helpful. I think cost is a big concern for people.
Yeah.
We like to ask everyone on the podcast, what is your number one tip for caregivers?
I would say my number one tip is that it takes a village. And what I mean by that is it seems to me, based on treating patients and in this home modification space, that a lot of caregivers feel really overwhelmed. And I guess my tip would be that there are a lot of professionals out there that are very eager to help out in all different spaces, like whether that's care management or whether that's an OT who's helping address the physical environment, or for finances or anything else. So there's a lot of different resources out there. And I think the tip would just be to understand it takes a village and like embrace those people who are willing to help and want to be trusted advisors. Right. So that'd be my tip.
Yeah, I love it. I think we hear a lot of similar things. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I haven't
Yeah.
heard it takes a village, but similar sentiments, like, surround yourselves with people that can support you. And that's part of what we're trying to just accomplish here, is like give people resources and
Yeah.
make it easier to, find your village. If people want to find you and or Jukebox
Mhm.
Health, where can they go online?
Yeah. So they can go on jukeboxhealth.com, like the music box, jukeboxhealth.com. We have a lot of great blogs that we've written. There's even products on there. We just did a huge revamp of our website that has all these new photos of different home modification products that we'll offer and suggest. And then, of course, they can always reach out to me via phone, email. I'm sure you'll post that in the description. And yeah, our main line too goes right to our client care team. and they're experts in all things modifications and questions that they might have as well. And I'm always available to chat with families as well if they have any questions.
I really appreciate your time and sharing about, OT and how people can start to think about preventing falls and how to look at their homes to be safe. We will tag you and Jukebox in all the places. I won't post your phone number online.
Okay,
But I will put jukeboxes and yeah, we'll be able to find you that way.
cool. Thank you so much for having me.